To trust or not to trust? That is the question. Let's talk a little bit about the zero trust environment in cybersecurity, how it applies to your life as a whole, how it applies to our industry, and in particular, the Internet of Things, where some of those things are large things like pipelines and like automated trucks. My name is Chris Joslin. I'm your host, and welcome to this edition of JOZ Bytes. Well, welcome back, everybody. This is Chris Joslin, your host, bringing you another episode of JOZ Bytes. And today we have a great opportunity to listen in on an expert in the cybersecurity industry, Mr. Mitch Rosen, who is the Global Director Solutions Engineer for a company called Keeper Security. We've got him on board, and I sat down with him a little earlier today and was able to go over some questions and get some answers. And frankly, he both got me excited about the future of technology and where we're going, both in this industry and as a nation as a whole. But he also got me a little frightened as to some of the things I haven't been doing right to secure my infrastructure, my company's infrastructure, my personal infrastructure. As always, we are brought to you by iLevelLogistics.com, www.iLevelLogistics.com, coming across your screen hopefully right about now. And we are an aggregated and curated website that brings you content, trying to start a community that really identifies with the transportation, logistics, supply chain industry as a whole, but brings it out of the shadows, so to speak, brings important principles, important elements of our industry and things that are happening in the world around us, and getting that community a better understanding of what's going on out there. We invite you, as always, to hang in there with us, listen to us on one of your podcast platforms, or watch us on our YouTube channel, JOZ Bytes, JOZ Bytes, and see what we're up to, see who are we talking to, see what kind of information we're bringing out into your attention. Join us today, and welcome aboard to Mitch Rosen.
Mitch, I really appreciate you joining us today, and it's a treat for me during any of these podcasts I do, any of these video casts I do, to bring someone on that knows kind of the technological aspects of where we're going in the future. But again, I introduced you a little bit in a preamble earlier, but if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your background, that would be a great thing for the audience to get to first.
Is this where I also tell everyone that you and I go way back, and I know where all the bodies are buried, and if you don't treat me right, this podcast is going to be more damaging to you than you realize.
Right. But luckily, I'm gonna in post, I'm gonna put a block out in there and just still hear a beep through the whole thing. That whole
right. And the body's buried and beep, exactly. And then over beep.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thanks, Chris. I appreciate you inviting me on, and hopefully we'll try to keep it somewhat professional. But I've been in the IT industry for well over 30 years, right? Just out of high school, joined the Navy, and started my electronics training. And of course, electronics evolved into computers and networking, and eventually, doing that for a number of years, you start focusing in different areas, and my journey has eventually taken me into cybersecurity, where I have specifically focused on privilege account management and enterprise password managing solutions, and really kind of looking at the behaviors and looking at how to guard the most sensitive data, which is all protected through passwords, right? And really kind of looking at password management as a new line of defense, right? It used to be security was all about preserving the network. Now it's really all about endpoint security, because people, especially with the pandemic, people aren't necessarily all in the same network, right? They're working all over the place. And so it's less concerning now to protect, a single network and trying to keep people from bouncing inside that area. as it is now to protect the computers and to protect the access,
Right.
right? Because as things are moving more to the cloud, it's not even so much, if you look at what's on your computer,
Yeah.
there's probably not a lot of really important stuff in there, but you're storing things in Google Docs, and you're storing things in Microsoft's cloud, and you're storing things in
Right.
Dropbox, and depending on if it's a SMB or if it's a midsize or enterprise, right? Everybody's got their kind of storage area there, and
Right.
if you can gain access to those storage areas, now you can get access to the real data.
So,
And
it's funny because two things you mentioned right there really kind of jump out at me. Number one, part of your professional career has been actually studying the behaviors so that defenses can be created to fend off these malicious attacks and things like that. That's very interesting because most of the time you think about IT professionals and programmers and cybersecurity and all this, you think about structure. At least I do. You think about the detail and the structure and which gate you need to keep closed and which you need to open and what you need to watch for and all those kinds of things. But the behavior on the other side of it, the elements of those malicious attacks probably show pattern, right? And
for
then
sure.
the second thing you mentioned is that this pandemic has kind of created a lot of different paths we didn't expect to go down quite as quickly as we did. But one of the things it did is you've lost the ability to wall off your business the way you used to. The firewalls aren't the same. The fences that you put up, the guards against all this stuff through VPN and everything has to be extended out much further than it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. And in my profession, right, working for an enterprise password management solution, we talk to a lot of companies, and they're very forthcoming, and we have NDAs in place to kind of protect that. But as we dialogue about this, you start hearing different trends and different things that are coming more and more common, right? More things are going to the cloud, right? It used to be Active
Right.
Directory was kind of this sole means of hey, in order to log into the domain, right, to get access to the network, right, it starts with your Active Directory credential. And while that's still in existence, it's also slowly fading away, right? Active Directory is being replaced by Azure, right? Azure Active
Right.
Directory, which I know they call it Active Directory. That's more of a marketing thing than it really is a technology thing, right? It's a different beast. But it's no longer, doing what it once did, right? It's literally just an identity now that people have, and being able to authenticate to these SaaS solutions, these cloud solutions, give authentication to different services that are all cloud-based. So more and more things are going to the cloud, and it's no longer, like you said, it's not the network anymore, right? Having a VPN, while companies still have it, more and more companies are not really putting prioritization in a VPN. In fact, the VPN always slows everyone down, right?
Well, isn't that really just an anonymizer overall? I mean, there's more to it than that, right? But isn't it primarily an anonymizer?
It's an anonymizer. I mean, on a personal basis, it's an anonymizer, right? In a professional basis, it's another door to get into the perimeter.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
And if you don't have the right access to get in that perimeter, you should be blocked from having, access to data and whatnot. And that's where malicious users are trying to figure out, well, if I can find out your password to your VPN, I can now pose as you and get into that inner circle and, find my way around the network and find, they're always looking for the next better credential, right? You might not have a lot of data based on your position, but if I can use your position to get into the network, and then once I'm on the network, I can look around and look for other credentials that might be stored there that have more permissions and use those to find something else. And
so it's like a cascading event, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about navigating around to eventually find the payload, right? And once they can gain access to the database and they can gain access to the infrastructure, they can exfiltrate all that data, put it on the dark web, and now they're serving up your credentials, not just for you individually.
Now they're marketing you.
Exactly, right? So all those things are occurring, and that's where these malicious users are going to, and if they can, let's say, find a privileged account, right? Something that protects the domain or whatnot, they put that on the dark web. If I'm a ransomware guy, right, I can buy ransomware, right? I don't even have to create it. Right? I just go to the dark web, buy some ransomware software, go to the dark web, find a privileged account on your network, and I just basically have outsourced the hard work. I log in, drop the malware in, and now your system is locked down until you pay me millions of dollars, right? And that's basically
Wow.
what happened with the Colonial Pipeline.
I was just going to mention that, of course, and as far as my industry is concerned, pipelines are not usually looked at in the transportation, infrastructure world the same way as I've been used to talking about in these video and podcasts. But in reality, it's the same thing. I mean, all the way from Houston up to Linden, New Jersey, with a lot of branches from there, was about, I believe, about 45% of the fuel for the East Coast was down. And you could see the snowball effect just at the price of the pump. And that we'll get into this in a second, but I think that it's kind of like a bigger version of the IoT, right? The Internet of Things. This is just one big thing that is accessed in the same manner that people talk about when I got to take a side tangent here, because I watched something on, I think it was Netflix the other day. It was kind of a funny uh, cartoon movie called I think it was Mitchell and the Machines or something like that. So if you haven't watched it, it was fun. It was a fun watch.
Right. We
Had
saw
some
that. It
great
was good.
comedy and stuff. But during this movie, there's a point in which all of these appliances and things all had this little sticker on them that made they had some kind of AI in them, right? So the Internet of Things was. I won't get into the whole story because it's worth a watch. But to me, the security around that, I don't know how anybody in your field is dealing with that amount of detail that's out there, because everything's got a chip in it now.
Yeah, so I mean that's definitely a concern, is someone figuring out how all this AI is programmed, and finding a path into that code so that you can rewrite the code, push it out to all these things that are probably going back routinely, checking in, saying, hey, do I have a firmware upgrade, right? Do I need
Right.
to improve on that? Usually it's for good security reasons, but if you have a malicious user going in there and they've broken in and are acting as someone else that has the ability to change the code, right? They could very well push out a firmware upgrade that now makes these harmless IoT devices now some sort of malicious cyber army that they could turn on microphones
Hmm.
and cameras and
Right.
anything else.
I remember there was, I think Samsung Television had that issue a number of years ago, where their cameras on their TVs in your front room would come on. Maybe they were taking pictures, maybe they were just listening. I have no idea, but you don't even know. And of course, all the personal assistants and everything. So you can really go down a trail of seeing where the technological edge we're reaching can be in and of itself just filled with enough flaws that can be attacked by these malicious entities to do a lot of things we don't want them to do. I don't even know what they want to do for the most part, except to your point, I never really even thought about this. I think about a lot of these cyber attacks, and ransomware is certainly very clear. It's easy to understand. You can see why people do that to get Bitcoin or whatever they're doing. But the other side of that you just mentioned, that I hadn't really thought about it from both a business side and a personal side, is selling that data on the dark web the way they do. So they compile lists like anybody else, I would imagine, with particular content or particular access codes into your systems. And I would imagine the gateway for the Internet of Things in general, and maybe I'm using the terminology wrong, maybe there's a better way to talk about it, but isn't it primarily your Wi-Fi systems? Because you've got the internet that comes into the home and the business, et cetera, and then the Wi-Fi systems. Isn't that the susceptible doorway, or the most susceptible doorway that we have to look at?
It's a doorway, right? I mean, anything connected to the internet, right? Whether you're hardwired or whether you're Wi-Fi, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
all one and the same in the big scheme of things. But it's the fact
Sure.
that by having a device connected to the internet means you potentially have someone that's trying to break in, right? There's um, a lot of infrastructure things out there that have networks that are off the grid deliberately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they won't connect a computer to the internet. They won't download anything. They'll do it on another network that is connected. And then they'll, what we call sneaker net, right? They'll put it on a disk and bring it over after it's
Right.
been scrutinized. And only then do they uh, add it into that closed network to prevent any sort of malicious user from being able to take over those sort of infrastructures.
So how does the industry reconcile this desire of not only the populace, but everything from governments to small to large businesses that want everything interconnected just for the data resource? How does it reconcile that with the whole idea of protection? Is it all based on more extravagant versions of encryption? Is that the kind of thing that's because I know, I mean, the name of the company you work for, Keeper Security, it talks about, I mean, when I think of that, it comes to mind password security, specifically password security. I know you do a heck of a lot more than that, but that seems to be, I read somewhere that over 75% of all hacks start with that one element, the password.
Exactly right. I think the statistics we have are 81% of all breaches originate with a password. When you look at like the hygiene of a password, right? Generally when I start talking to someone about password security, the easiest way to conceive it is if I asked you if you use the same password on your Facebook account as your bank account, if you answer yes on that, you've got a password problem, right?
Yeah.
Where most people fail in thinking about passwords is they're under the old paradigm of I need to know my password, can't write it down because that's not secure, so I have to memorize it. And so as a result, they use the same password everywhere or a close enough variation so that they can remember what it is or remember kind of their go-to, process, right? It's the same word with the same date, and maybe they add a one or an exclamation point at the end or something like that, and they'll just keep running through those until they
you're
figure
coming
out
way
what it
too
is.
close to guessing my passwords right now. I can tell. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a little better than that, but not. That's the question, really. I mean, Mitch, I see every time you sign up for a new website, there's several different layers of things you can do depending on the protocol that website gives you, and you got to look at that too. HTTPS, right, versus secure versus not secured. But I mean, the passwords they come up with, I don't know. I mean, the computer will remember them, but isn't that a problem too?
Well, the stored in your browser is a problem because
Right.
if you walk away from your browser, guess what? Anyone can walk up and go to your browser and export that data. And this is really where a password managing solution makes a lot of sense, right? Most security professionals, right, like 99% of them would recommend a password managing solution because they're encrypted, right? And ours specifically is encrypted in multi layers, right? So if you have 1,000 records in your vault, you're going to have 1,000 unique AES 256-bit encrypted records that contain each of your passwords. And when you no longer are trying to memorize all your passwords, but you're allowing it to develop a complex and strong and unique credential and allow the technology to fill that in for you, whether you're on a mobile device or using a web browser or even our desktop application, you suddenly now have a much better hygiene, right? And when you're not using the same password, your risk of having a password that's compromised, and it inevitably is going to happen. You're going to create a password on a site, that site's going to get breached, and that password's going to go to the dark web. And once the dark web has it, if you're reusing that password somewhere else, you're now susceptible in multiple areas. But if you limit it to only one unique password per login type, you'd greatly reduce your risk and you're only susceptible on that one, right? I just got a notification saying Park Mobile had a breach. And so the first thing I did on that is, through Keeper, I have Breach Watch added. So I'll get notified when that password is found on the dark web. But I didn't even wait for that. I went ahead and rotated it right away. So they wouldn't be able to log in as me on Park Mobile.
So the question this brings up for me, just while you're discussing this password, I guess lack of a better way to put it, the amount of detail a password has for the encryption level. The first thing that comes up to me is if I have something like Password Keeper that you're talking about, which is basically a wallet for passwords, something like that, or keychain of some kind. When you have something like that, what's to stop somebody from being able to breach your company or somebody else's company's reserve of that information?
Yeah, good question. So we're what's called a zero knowledge solution, or what some people refer to as a zero trust solution. Um,
Okay.
because for us specifically, the encryption all occurs locally, right? So when you launch Keeper as an application and you create a new record for, let's say you're logging into a new site for the first time, and you use Keeper to randomly generate your credential and you store it
Hmm.
inside there, all the encryption, decryption occurs locally. So the only thing really you're using the cloud for is to synchronize the ciphertext, right? The gobbledygook, the
Okay.
the
Gotcha.
already
Is that a
mangled
technical word? Gobbledygook?
gobbledygook is a technical word. Use it all the time. Um, so really, all we're doing is we're synchronizing what the local app has encrypted and only
Hmm.
sending the ciphertext up to the cloud, and that can synchronize now to your phone and your other devices
Gotcha.
in a protected mode. And only once you log in, right, either through a master password, which is what most users do, or for businesses that have integrated single sign-on, right? Only then does it decrypt it once they're back in the application. And so,
It's
through
so funny because you use the term zero trust or zero trust is what I've heard of before. You said it a little differently than but I kind of always thought that was an odd term to use because I don't know, the old thing I used to hear all the time was, trust but verify. Now it's don't trust anybody and verify every time.
right.
And that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. But I guess with what we're talking about, especially when you broaden the scope of that and talk about whether it's pipelines, whether it's the Internet of Things, it can be your freaking refrigerator. You can put a list on it now and send it to the local place to pick up your groceries nowadays. I think you can even set that up to do. But in my world, in the transportation logistics world, supply chain, of course, everybody is driving quickly toward this idea of autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, things like that. Matter of fact, I think that they're predicting in the next 5 or 6 years that about 1.7 million commercial trucks with a high level of autonomy, because there's kind of 5 levels of autonomy, from nothing except you behind the wheel to it does it all yourself or that's else. And I, I see it's there's no turning back from it. It's coming. But I think about that and I think, okay, you have the vehicles that have technology in them that can be attacked. You have the technologies on the outside that are monitoring the vehicles that can be attacked. You've got proximity alert embedded into the road and rail infrastructure that can be attacked. I mean, my gosh, I don't know how they can overcome all this. I guess everything will have to have a pilot in it in my mind, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everything's a cat and mouse game, right? You try to
Mm.
make them as secure as possible, and invariably, there's going to be somebody out there that wants to infiltrate it and has
Right.
nefarious goals set to it. And so, as a little vulnerability is disclosed, right, somebody will fix it, and then another vulnerability is disclosed, and someone will fix it, and hopefully, in this process, we don't run into any huge catastrophic situations, right?
Pipelines, Suez Canal, really,
Which, I mean, if you
all
think
those
about the
kind of.
pipeline, while having large ramifications, and I'm in the South, right? We got hit hard, right?
Right.
There, I know they said the state of Georgia had 45% of the gas stations hit. In
Oh
my
my God.
area, it was more like 90% of the gas stations were hit, right? We had to drive long and hard and go to 4 or 5 gas stations in order to get gas because everybody was out
Wow.
already, right? It was like going back to the 1970s and voting for Jimmy Carter again.
Yeah.
It was challenging, but all that to say is there will be some more issues. This won't be the last time we hear about a ransomware attack because they're relatively simple, right? They're easy, right?
Mhm.
Especially when organizations aren't protecting the keys of the kingdom, aren't using good strategies to protect their identities and leverage
Mhm.
strong and unique credentials. I mean, that's low hanging fruit in the security world.
Well, and I think to your point, it's low hanging fruit, especially for SMBs too, because these small and medium businesses oftentimes are trying to compete with the big guys. They don't have the pocketbook to do a lot of the things maybe that are required today to keep technologically ahead of the game. And I know a number of truckers here in Southern California over the course of my career out here within the last 10 years, really, that have been attacked with ransomware and I don't know any of them that haven't paid up, to be honest with you. So it's a
And that's what
difficult thing to deal
that's
with.
why it's an attack vector that's going to be used. Is you hit the nail on the
Hmm.
head. Everybody pays, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
so two things happen there, right? Number one, you pay and you hope that they're going to honor the payment in order to relieve it. And
hmm.
surprisingly, there is a little bit of a
Well,
a trust there.
if they didn't honor it, then everybody stops paying, right? That's kind of
It- it- yeah,
the cat and mouse game you're talking about,
but the
really.
real important thing is organizations, whether they're an SMB, midsize, enterprise, have to
Hmm.
recognize the cost of having something like an enterprise password manager is significantly, I mean, by large amounts, less money than it is to pay on these ransoms, right? I mean, you look at our
Yeah,
solution,
yeah, I
right?
hear you.
You're talking thousands of dollars a year to support having an enterprise password manager, or millions of dollars after the fact, right? So you either pay now in the form of protection, or you
Hmm.
pay and you pay dearly later on in the mitigation aspect.
Yeah, you can pay me now or you can pay me later, as the old saying goes. And I agree. I'm an advocate for the same thing. I think the unfortunate part isn't that these small and medium businesses don't want to. It's oftentimes that they don't. They're wearing all these different hats. They're moving as quickly as they can to just kind of survive the putting out the fires each day and managing their company to some kind of degree of success. And the last thing they think about is somebody's going to be worried about their small little company and infiltrating it and putting something up for ransom. But that's exactly what happens. It happens on the claim side of our industry all the time. These shippers of different sizes will make a decision on the frequency of the possibility of cargo getting stolen, and they oftentimes won't insure themselves properly because it's expensive to do until that one big hit comes, and then all of a sudden they're looking at a devastating financial proposition either way. So I'm a total advocate. I'm on your side of the fence with that. You got to get some kind of security up. You got to, and back to what we were talking about before on the password side of things. The I'm sure there are other vulnerabilities. There always are. I know that a couple of years ago, my company had a email spoof situation happen, and it was deadly accurate. I mean, literally the emails were off by a single letter, both from and to us from a vendor, and it ended up costing us. I'm not even going to say cost me a lot of money to rectify that situation. And the banks involved never paid it all back. FBI got involved, and when I actually talked to them, they kind of looked at me and said, "Unfortunately, we have much bigger fish to fry." And I
Right.
think that was indicative of me. And the first time I really thought, you know what, this cybersecurity side of things it's not going away at all. I mean, the technology keeps getting better. There's blockchain things that can be adapted to kind of be both uh, security wise at a higher level, but also creating a chain of custody that's recognized, right? But I, it's tough for me to understand where the next steps are, except to get your passwords taken care of, right?
Yeah, it
So,
definitely, again, when we look at low hanging fruit, it's a very low cost solution with big uptick, right? Being able to know that, hey, I'm only sharing the credentials with the people that need it. I'm
mhm.
using unique ones. They're protected. They're not just sitting on my network, so that if someone does infiltrate that infrastructure, that they won't easily have access to that data. It's really a no brainer.
So other than the financial, though, what are the reasons that companies go after this data anyway? I mean, I would think that would be the primary motivation for breaches of any kind,
It really, I
or
mean, at the end of the
disrupting your
day,
competitors, I suppose.
at
But
the end of the
government to
day,
government, there's probably something else.
yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about money, right?
Yeah,
And ransomware being a very easy easy way to go about it.
yeah, yeah. Well, I can tell you that I hope to stay under that particular radar, and I think off camera we're going to be talking a little bit more about, the kind of solution that you have, because maybe my password protected spreadsheet of passwords is not going to do the trick much longer. And long ago are the days when I can remember all my passwords. Just everything requires them. And I did hear somewhere that whole, I think it's called CAPTCHA. Am I pronouncing that right? I heard that was kind of going away, and there's kind of a new form of double verification that's coming out to make sure you're not a robot.
Those CAPTCHA things are annoying, right? You pick all the sidewalks and everything looks like a sidewalk.
Exactly.
Those definitely are horrible. I mean, but they serve a good purpose, right? They're trying to prevent bots from going out there and just brute forcing everything and trying to, crawl the internet and just start punching through and start trying to attempt to log into different things, right? So they serve a purpose. They're just annoying as all can be.
Yeah, and I would imagine in your industry, though, there's got to be a lot of R&D to try to keep ahead of this stuff. Continually updating the technology to keep everything secure.
Yeah, one of the things that we always talk about when it comes to password management, right, is you want to protect that entry point, right? So two-factor being a huge one. Always leverage two-factor. And if you can do two-factor, not utilizing SMS, you're even in better shape, right? When you receive a text message with that code, those are actually relatively easy for criminals to gain access to, right? They can.
So what I've seen is either text or email. Or is there something different that I'm?
Well,
I mean, a fob. A fob
yeah,
would be the best way, I would think.
you could use a fob. I mean, there's things called UB keys, right? They're little hardware devices that basically store a key on there, and instead of doing it over the air, you just plug it in your device and you tap it. But they're not as widely used on everything, right? Some things accept them, some things don't. Most things will allow you to set up a TOTP, right? A one-time sensitive password, to where you use like an authenticator app like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator. And when you set it up, it gives you a little QR code, and you take your device out and you take a picture of it, and it brings it in. And basically there's a seed there with a key that, what happens is the server will randomly generate a new code every 30, 60 seconds. Your device, having the same seed, generates the same code. It uses the timestamp basically to keep them in sync so that they know it. And then when it asks you for that number, right, you can go to your device and say, okay, here's the number that it is, and it verifies your identity there, right? Because they have to be, they have to have that seed, that key, in order to be able to generate it. Right. In our product, we have that as part of a record level solution. So it makes it easier. Like if I log into Twitter, I can put in my username, my password, and have the TOTP automatically populate using our browser extension. So, being able to have that on each account, right? Having a two-factor is going to protect that identity, right? It's one more thing that they have to do. Right? You got to know the password, which the password manager can do, and having two-factor on. And if you can leverage a TOTP, right, now you can allow our solution to populate that as well. So you don't have to pull your phone out to type in those 6 numbers, which, how many times have you had it to where either A, you fat fingered the numbers as you put them in, or B, you just got to the very tail end and it changed
and it
you
changes.
Didn't get it in fast
Exactly.
enough. So, annoying, yes, but definitely better. The reason you can use an SMS is they'll send you the code. But again, if your phone is spoofed, now they know what the code is as well, right? So if you ever start getting text saying, hey, someone's trying to log in with your account, it's a pretty good indication that someone's attempting to log into your account.
Yeah, the funny thing is all the stuff you're talking about, I love this. Thank you very much for running down some of these different things, because number one, I like to, I'm certainly not, Mr. Techie, but I like to be tech savvy enough to understand where things are going and kind of how I need to fit into things. But I recognize that our world, with all these different innovations, is trying to make our lives simpler, quicker, easier to get things done. But this layer of cybersecurity that you need to put onto it kind of tells you to go, put your brakes on it just a little bit to get these things accomplished, so that you don't risk something larger. And that is a message that I'm definitely receiving, and hopefully people that are watching or listening to this are receiving the same.
Yeah, hopefully. So,
Yeah.
if anyone walks away from this, right, the main thing to know is at a minimum, right, protect your entry point, right? You use unique credentials,
Mhm.
stop trying to memorize them, break down, get a password management solution. There are free ones out there, but you obviously get more features and functionality when you go to a paid solution, and look at the security of those solutions, right? Because
So
they're
a
not all
password management solution is what you're advocating.
exactly a password manager, right? For consumer side, we would just call it password manager. On the business side, we call it an enterprise password manager.
Enterprise, okay. And I'm sure there are different levels of things that can be, outsourced in that manner to get it done. So that's
Yeah,
good.
there's different solutions out there. On the surface, they all look similar, but when you get under the hood, you really see there's some
Yeah,
huge differences between the different vendors that provide that service.
yeah. And for anybody out there that's kind of sitting back and just trusting that you're exempt from the behaviors we're talking about, the malicious behaviors that are out there, your technology, one way or another, is out there on the cloud. It's being looked at, if not infiltrated yet. And I will tell you from my experience, it's really only a matter of time before something occurs. And to Mitch's point, if you start to have some of this knowledge, you can't reel that back and say you don't understand anymore. You don't need to know all the technicalities of something like this, but what you do need to know is you need some kind of fence, some kind of protection, some kind of gatekeeper to allow you, and forget the trust and verify. Trust first and verify. How about zero trust to begin with for these kind of systems? And, Mitch, I wanted to thank you again for being able to come on for a few minutes and spend some time and share some of your expertise. I know you got a busy day, and that it certainly probably flies by with the number of things that are going on out there on a daily basis, from large companies to small companies, international, domestic, et cetera, that are being affected by all this stuff. And as the global director, solutions engineer, correct? Is that kind of the way you're viewed for the company? It's got to be very inundating to keep ahead of the games on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me, and yeah, it is. It's a fun task, right? Being able to help companies improve their security, and being able to kind of view things in a different light, and to change the paradigm so that not just the company is more protected, but each individual at the company is protected. And when they start adapting those same processes in their personal life as they do their professional life, or many times it happens in their personal life first, and then they bring it over their professional life. You get a sense of fulfillment there, and reward, and knowing that you're making it that much harder for the bad guys to make any sort of headway.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And Mitch, thanks again very much for spending some time with us. And I hope to get you on. And the next time I get you on, I'm hoping to tell you that I'm totally password protected.
It's an endeavor, right? It's an
Yeah,
ongoing process. The great thing
yeah,
too is my kids all use it. They know like my boys, if they create a new video game somewhere, they're going to open up Keeper. They're going to create a unique password. They're going to put it in their vault. And then from a dad perspective, I get to see what those are.
Oh, yeah, well, hey, that's side benefits of that for sure. Very
Exactly.
good. Yeah. Well, that's the message, guys. And again, I appreciate you coming and viewing this and listening to this on the podcast platform of your choice. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot, Mitch.
You're welcome, Chris.
Special thanks again to Mitch Rosen for joining us today for this conversation. It's been illuminating in a lot of different ways, both from a professional and a personal standpoint. And I can't thank him enough for spending some time with us. He's an absolute expert in the cybersecurity industry and has an interesting history that, with a longer podcast, we probably delved into would have been a lot of fun. But as always, join us on any podcast platform of your choice, Apple, Spotify, all those, and join us at our YouTube channel, JOZ Bytes, JOZ Bytes, and see us there. Any one of the number of podcasts that we put together. And most importantly, come join the community at iLevelLogistics.com. That's www.iLevelLogistics.com. And until next time, we'll be seeing you soon.